Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're exploring the story of Christine Jorgensen. We've got quite a range of sources: her autobiography, news reports from the time, encyclopedias, even analyses of how the media covered her.
Yeah, and our aim here is really to get a handle on just how groundbreaking her transition was.
Mm.
We want to look at the world she stepped into, as one of the very first public figures to have gender-affirming surgery and understand her impact as, well, an early voice for trans rights.
Absolutely. So let's start with the basics. She was born George William Jorgensen Jr., 1926, New York City. And the key thing is, she becomes the first American whose gender-affirming surgery in the early 50s gets massive public attention.
Right. And before that, she was a WWII GI, which is quite a starting point.
It really is. And that military service, that happened in a time when, well, ideas about gender identity were very different.
Oh, completely. You have to remember, during her early life, there wasn't this systematic understanding we have now. She often called what we now term gender dysphoria just gender confusion.
Okay, right. And maybe we should quickly clarify some terms just so everyone's on the same page. When we talk about gender identity, transgender, gender dysphoria, transition,
Yeah.
what do those mean in this context?
Sure. So gender identity, that's your own internal sense of being male, female, maybe something else entirely.
Mm-hmm.
For most folks, it matches the sex assigned at birth. But for a transgender person, it doesn't.
Okay.
And that mismatch, that incongruence, can cause gender dysphoria, which is, significant distress or discomfort.
Got it. And transition is the process of aligning thing.
Exactly. It can be social, changing your name, pronouns, how you present yourself, and it can be medical hormone therapy using estrogen or testosterone and gender-affirming surgeries.
Right.
And it's really crucial to stress. Gender identity is totally separate from sexual orientation. Who you're attracted to is a different thing altogether.
Right. Important distinction. Okay, so with that groundwork, let's go back to Christine's early life. What were the first signs she felt this misalignment?
Well, according to her own accounts, from really early on, she felt she didn't fit the male gender she was assigned. She used that phrase, feeling like a woman trapped in a male body.
Hmm.
That feeling of being different was, like, always there through her childhood.
And then after high school, 1945, she joins the Army. That must have been incredibly difficult, given how she felt inside.
Yeah, you have to imagine it was.
Yeah.
She lived outwardly as male then, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But after the war, she gets discharged in 46. She's working jobs in New York, and she starts finding out about what they called sex reassignment surgery back then.
Ah, so that was the moment, realizing there might be a medical path.
It seems like it was a huge revelation, the idea that maybe, just maybe, her body could align with who she felt she was.
And there was a book, right? Paul DeCruif's The Male Hormone from 48. That played a role.
Yes, definitely. The male hormone. It was mostly about testosterone, but reading it, Jorgensen started connecting the dots for herself, her own struggles, her feelings, maybe hormones were key.
So it wasn't just learning about male hormones, it sparked the idea of changing her own hormones.
Exactly. It kind of gave her this idea, this hope that medical intervention, changing her hormonal balance, might be possible. It offered a direction, a way to address that gender confusion she talked about.
Okay, so that realization about hormones, how did she take the first actual medical steps?
So in 1949, she finds and meets with a Dr. Joseph Angelo in New Jersey. And accounts say they talked a lot about her identity, the distress it caused. Dr. Angelo, recognizing how genuine this was, prescribed her estradiol synthetic estrogen.
Wow, so she started hormones pretty early on. What effect did that have?
It sounds like it was really positive, physically and emotionally. She reported feeling calmer, just better overall, more energy. The depression she'd felt started to lift. She felt more productive. It was like a powerful confirmation for her.
That must have felt incredibly validating. But hormones weren't the whole picture for her, were they? She started looking into surgery.
Precisely. The hormones helped a lot. But she began researching surgeons who could perform a penectomy removal of the penis. And that search led her to Copenhagen, Denmark in 1950.
Why Denmark?
Well, Copenhagen was becoming known then as a place where some surgeons were gaining experience with these kinds of, well, very new gender transition treatments.
And she met someone important there, medically speaking.
Yes, Dr. Christian Hamburger. He was a Danish doctor specializing in hormone replacement. He became her main physician there and actually increased her estrogen dosage.
Okay.
And under his care, the physical changes continued: smoother skin, more feminine body shape, things like that.
It's interesting this early stage involved both hormones and the pursuit of surgery. What about the legal side in Denmark? Were these procedures just allowed?
That's a really good point. No, Dr. Hamburger actually had to get special permission from the Danish Minister of Justice to do the surgeries. They weren't considered routine or emergency procedures at all.
Wow.
It really highlights how pioneering this was and the hoops they had to jump through.
So what were the actual surgeries in Denmark?
There were two main ones in Copenhagen. First, an orchiectomy removing the testicles. That was in 1951. Then a penectomy removing the penis in 1952.
And afterwards, how did she feel?
She wrote about feeling, by the time she'd recovered in 52, just really accepted, more confident, more alive, more herself. And that's also when she started getting into photography more seriously.
And we should note, right, that these first surgeries didn't include creating a vagina. Vaginoplasty came later.
That's correct, yeah. The focus in Denmark was on removing the male genitalia. The vaginoplasty happened later, after she returned to the U.S.
Okay, so she has these major surgeries, feels more herself, and then she comes back to the States in 1952, and boom, suddenly everyone knows. How did the news break?
Well, interestingly, it seems Jorgensen herself actually leaked the story, or at least shared it with the press initially, maybe wanting some control over the narrative, you know.
And it just exploded. That New York Daily News headline, XGI becomes blonde beauty, operations transform Bronx youth, it's still famous.
Oh, totally iconic.
Yeah.
And it instantly made her world famous. Huge fascination, but also, a lot of skepticism, even condemnation. People just didn't know how to react. The headline itself, it captures that mixed fascination, but also framing her as this oddity.
And how does she explain it herself? She used that phrase, nature's misjudgment, didn't she?
Yes, she did. She framed it as correcting a biological mistake, essentially. And she always insisted she was a heterosexual woman attracted to men.
Which goes back to what you said earlier, gender identity versus sexual orientation.
Exactly. She needed to make that clear, partly to counter the idea that transition was somehow linked to being gay, which was a common misconception then.
So the early media, it sounds like it was intense curiosity mixed with difficulty accepting her. You mentioned the Las Vegas press was harsh.
Yeah, it was definitely a mixed bag. Some outlets were maybe sensational, but seemed sort of supportive on the surface, but underneath there was often this struggle to really affirm her as a woman. And yeah, some parts of the press were just openly critical and judgmental.
So facing all that scrutiny, how did she actually build a life, a career?
Well, her first attempt was that documentary, Denmark, in 1953, trying to tell her story her way, but it kind of skirted around the details of her transition, focused more on the travel.
And people didn't like that.
No, apparently audiences wanted the personal story, the details, so it got criticized for holding back.
So what did she do then?
She pivoted to performing. Nightclubs, this was the early 50s, before TD was everywhere, so nightclubs were huge entertainment venues. And she actually became quite successful as a singer and performer, made good money.
Interesting. So she stayed in the public eye, but more on her own terms as an entertainer.
Right. It let her connect with people, maybe control the narrative a bit more, and just make a living.
And the vaginoplasty surgery that happened a bit later back in the U.S.
Yes, 1954. Back in the States, Dr. Angelo, who she saw early on, was involved, and also Dr. Harry Benjamin, a really key figure in early transgender health research. Though the sources say we don't have a ton of specifics about that particular surgery.
Living under that constant spotlight must have created personal problems too, like the marriage license denial in '59.
Oh, absolutely. That was a huge public example of the barriers she still faced. She and Howard J. Knox wanted to get married in New York, but they were denied because her birth certificate still listed her as male.
So the state saw it as a same-sex marriage, which wasn't legal.
Exactly. It just shows how the law was completely unprepared for or unwilling to recognize her reality, how legal definitions of sex were rigid.
And what was her take on that, on the birth certificate issue?
Well, from her writings and interviews, she strongly disagreed that the birth certificate should define her legal sex, especially after everything she'd been through medically. But the laws were all over the place. Then some states might allow changes, others wouldn't. In the end, she and Knox couldn't marry, and the relationship didn't last.
Despite all these challenges, she became a really important advocate, didn't she? How did that evolve?
Well, publishing her autobiography in 1967 was huge. Christine Jorgensen, a personal autobiography. The media had focused so much on the physical sensation, but the book went deeper into her feelings, her psychological journey. It offered a much more rounded picture.
And she kept performing alongside the advocacy.
Yes, right through the 60s, 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
Performing, but also increasingly using that platform to talk about transgender people, about the need for understanding and acceptance of gender affirmation surgery. She really merged her career with her activism.
And Hollywood even made a movie,
Yeah, 1970, the Christine Jorgensen story.
which brought her story to an even bigger audience, although, Hollywood takes liberties.
Still, her impact seems massive for the time, a real early spokesperson.
Definitely. Just by being visible, by telling her story, she forced conversations about gender identity that just weren't happening publicly before. She really helped shift things, slowly maybe, but significantly. Took incredible courage.
And the personal impact must have been enormous, those thousands of letters you mentioned. Yeah, imagine people writing to her from all over, feeling lost, needing help, seeing her as maybe the only person who might understand. She became this beacon for so many.
And she took it to universities, too.
She did. Lecturing, sharing her experience, educating students about gender identity, trying to tackle prejudice head-on in academic spaces.
It's good to see her legacy is still being formally recognized now. The Legacy Walk, Rainbow Honor Walk, National LGBTQ Wall of Honor.
Absolutely. Those honors, mostly in the 2010s, really cement her place as a true pioneer in LGBTQ plus history, someone whose impact we still feel today.
She passed away in 1989 from cancer. Looking back, it's also important, like you said, to see her story in context. There were earlier efforts around gender-affirming care, right, before her.
Yes, definitely. It's crucial not to see her in a vacuum. There was pioneering work happening way back in the 1920s in Germany. Magnus Hirschfeld, a physician and sexologist, his Institute for Sexual Science in Berlin was doing amazing research.
But that was all destroyed.
Tragically, yes. When the Nazis came to power, they targeted the institute, raided it, burned the research, persecuted trans people. It was a horrific destruction of knowledge and lives. And you see echoes of that kind of backlash even today, unfortunately.
And even after Christine became famous in the U.S., there were still major setbacks here, too.
Oh, yes. Progress wasn't smooth. Like the Johns Hopkins Gender Clinic, one of the first in the U.S., closed down in 1979. Why? Largely due to transphobic attitudes in parts of the medical field.
Wow.
And then, in the early 80s, the Reagan administration labeled gender-affirming care experimental. That basically cut off federal insurance coverage for a lot of people, making access much harder. It shows how things can move backwards as well as forward.
It's a sobering reminder. But the history of transgender people goes back much further and wider than often acknowledged, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Trans people have always existed across countless cultures. Many societies historically recognized more than two genders. Often, it was European colonization that imposed a strict male-female binary and erased those older understandings.
And even in the U.S. in the 50s, alongside Christine's story, there was other activism happening.
Right. While Christine had the media spotlight, you also had early trans activism, often led by trans people of color, fighting against police harassment, fighting for basic survival and rights in their own communities. That's a vital part of the history, too.
So her story is one incredibly important thread in a much bigger tapestry. Bringing this deep dive toward a close, what's the main takeaway from Christine Jorgensen's life?
I think fundamentally she was a pioneer. Simple as that. She lived her truth so bravely at a time when doing so was incredibly difficult, even dangerous. Her visibility started conversations about gender identity on a scale that just hadn't happened before. She forced people to confront it.
And that impact went beyond just talk, right?
Oh, definitely. She helped normalize talking about trans issues even if controversy followed her. She absolutely paved the way for later generations of trans people and activists. Her courage in the face of hostility was just instrumental. And that struggle for acceptance, well, it's still ongoing.
It really is an inspiring story of resilience. So a final thought for you listening. How does Christine Jorgensen's story, even though it's decades old, still speak to us today? How does it challenge how we think about gender right now? And maybe, what lessons can her journey offer as we all work towards, hopefully, a future with more equality and acceptance for everyone, whatever their gender identity?